In the chaotic rise of the new Germany, a unit emerged as Hitler's personal shield, his Leibstandarte, or lifeguard. Formed initially as a small guard unit, it would soon become the infamous 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, one of the most elite yet controversial fighting forces of the Third Reich. Led by figures with iron loyalty and brutal efficiency, this division would go on to play a significant role on the battlefields of Europe, but its origins were far from the massive war machine it would eventually become. Join us as we uncover the beginnings of this unit, exploring its initial formation, early influences, and how it evolved from a personal guard into a symbol of a new power. On November 9th, 1933, approximately 830 men assembled in front of the theatre at the Munich Feldherrnhalle War Memorial at the Odeonplatz. This event took place 11 months after Hitler was proclaimed Reich Chancellor. The only source of illumination in the square was the torches, as the lamps had gone out. At midnight, after the final ring of the bell from the Theatiner Kirche, Hitler arrived in a Wagnerian fashion with Himmler, Defense Minister General Werner von Blomberg, and Gruppenführer Sepp Dietrich, who brought his lifeguard to swear him in. Hitler was sworn in by his lifeguard. Heinrich Himmler began his oath-taking by quoting the SS pledge and declaring, "We swear to you, Adolf Hitler, loyalty and bravery." He later went on to take the oath himself. "You have our solemn promise that we will obey you till the day when we pass away." The entire oath was then uttered by the members of the SS, which read as follows: "I swear loyalty and bravery to you, Adolf Hitler, as Führer and Reich Chancellor. My solemn oath is to obey you till the end of time, as well as to those individuals whom you have appointed to guide me. Lord, please come to my aid." At least one of the spectators at the SS event described it as a time of euphoria for Emil Helfferich. "Splendid young men, serious of face, exemplary in bearing and turnout," Helfferich said to reporters, "one of the privileged." My eyes began to flood up with tears as I listened to the collective recitation of the promise by thousands of voices beneath the light shining from torches. This was similar to praying. The newly recruited members of the Leibstandarte who had not yet taken their promise were dispatched to Munich to participate in the annual ritual that took place in front of the Feldherrnhalle, beginning in that year. Himmler never wavered in his effort to amass as much power as he possibly could. On numerous occasions, he referred to the party's organization book and stressed the fact that Hitler's own guard had been closely associated with the SS ever since the organization was established. The protection of the Führer is the fundamental and first task of the SS from the beginning. Because of a decree, its jurisdiction has been extended to include the protection of the Reich's internal affairs. Due to the fact that he later became the commander of the Leibstandarte, Himmler claimed that this proclamation granted him the authority to consider it to be his own personal area. In reality, things were a little bit different. His orders came directly from Sepp Dietrich, who was in possession of the Führer's ear. Himmler received them. It was inevitable that Dietrich and Himmler would come into conflict as a consequence of this. Himmler, who was furious with the Leibstandarte, referred to it as a complete law unto itself. It has no regard for any directions that come from higher up, and it acts and allows anything it chooses to do. During his interrogations with American authorities after the war, Dietrich made it very plain what he thought of the other man. The guy in question made an effort to imitate the Führer. He was unable to sate his insatiable thirst for power. Additionally, he was highly good in the art of hoarding and scrounging. His financial support came from a wide variety of sources. Both Himmler and I had a lot of disagreements with each other. It would be an understatement on my part. With his icy look while wearing granny glasses, Himmler had the ability to transform a large number of SS subordinates into trembling jelly. Dietrich, on the other hand, did not demonstrate such care. He disdained social graces and frequently used language that was considered as vulgar. The two men were having a talk when Dietrich suddenly exploded, stating, "As guard commander, I will not permit your meddling in security issues any more than I will with regard to my men's morals." Dietrich and the other man were having a chat. "Each of us is Hitler's, and each of them is mine. Please come back to your office immediately, and we will get back to work." It is only natural that some of the methods of recruitment and training that were utilized for the Leibstandarte's troops were equally applicable to other armed organizations that were currently preparing for combat. Soldiers of the Waffen SS, on the other hand, were distinguished by the fact that they were frequently required to adhere to the stringent ideological beliefs of National Socialism. This was a requirement of service that led to confrontations with the Wehrmacht. Heinrich Himmler, who saw the Leibstandarte as the consummation of his own objectives, was ultimately the source of these disagreements. From the perspective of a soldier of the Reichswehr named Walter Dornberger, Himmler was described as being like an intellectual elementary school master, absolutely not a guy of brutality. In point of fact, he gave off the impression of being the complete antithesis of anything even remotely associated with the military. He had a solid respectability associated with the middle class, an intellectual background, and a disciplined upbringing. It is possible that Himmler's interest in the army is not surprising, despite the fact that by 1918, when he was authorized to enlist in the 11th Bavarian Infantry Regiment at the age of 18, there was no room for him. The armistice prevented him from serving in the military, so he decided to enroll at the Technical High School of Munich University to study agriculture. This decision was made 1 year after he was denied the opportunity to serve in the military. His focus with his physical well-being was the only thing that was allowed to interfere with Himmler's ability to concentrate primarily on his academics. The insanity of his attempts to achieve the goal was demonstrated by the fact that he was unable to even reach the parallel bars that were located in the gymnasium of some university. As part of his commitment to the Munich students, he also attended the shooting and dueling portion of the event. After he had finally been successful in obtaining a duel, his adversary cut him 5 times, and as a result, he was given a ligature and 5 stitches. Evidently, Himmler was overjoyed by the news. At the same time as he was working to improve his physical fitness, Himmler was also absorbing long-standing racial concerns, such as the concept of Germans as a pure race. Therefore, it is feasible to appreciate the reasons behind his later determination that the appearance of his black guards be what he considered to be exclusively that of the Nordic people. "I insist on a height of 1.70 meters, he stated to reporters. "Every year, I select 100 or 2 photographs and require that they demonstrate whether or not there are any characteristics that are characteristic of Mongolians or Slavs. Every guy needs to have a physique that is well proportioned. For instance, there should not be any imbalance between the legs and the body, or between the lower leg and the thigh. Otherwise, carrying out such extended marches would require an amazing amount of physical effort. When it comes to matters of discipline, the most important idea is that a man should not behave in a submissive manner. Rather, his hands, his walk, and everything else, incredible manhood thanks to our capabilities. It was just not adequate at all. All members of the SS were required to present a record of their genealogy by the end of 1935. The pedigree documents had to go back to the year 1759 for commanders and to the year 1800 for lesser ranks. As a consequence of this, undesirable blood was not tolerated, and any potential recruit who was later found to have lied or been misled about his origins would be promptly ejected from the organisation. The decision to enroll in the military of the Führer is nothing less than the voluntary decision to carry the ongoing political battle to a new level, as stated in an order issued by the SS. Although it is not known what Sepp Dietrich thinks of Himmler's racial obsessions, it is possible to infer what he thinks about them. There is no doubt the personal life of a Leibstandarte man was intricately intertwined with it. In order to determine whether or not he wanted to marry his prospective bride, for instance, she was required to submit a photograph of herself wearing a swimming suit along with her family tree for evaluation. Dietrich was convinced that his Leibstandarte should have a place were available for training. In the middle of the 1930s, the Lichterfelder barracks served as the most impressive display. Its front gate was designed to look like a dreary office complex. Between the years 1940 and 1941, things had changed in every way. The main gate, which was approached via a picturesque street that was bordered by trees, was now dominated by 2 heroic-sized sculptures of soldiers who were overcoated and had coal scuttle helmets. Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler was shown in a very large font, and it was topped with an eagle and a swastika. At each of the 4 corners of a massive rectangle, there were large dormitory blocks with names like Adolf Hitler, Horst Wessel, Hermann Göring, and Hindenburg. The rectangle contained the classrooms and other educational facilities that were positioned within it. In the receiving hall of the barracks, the best oak furnishings were found, and the walls were ornamented with Nordic runes that were inlaid in silver. Additionally, Frederick the Great, who served as Hitler's primary source of motivation. There were a number of service facilities, one of which was the vast Feldmarschall Saal dining hall, which had the capacity to serve a single dinner to 1,000 military members. A Protestant church was located on the south side of the command structure, and it was utilised by both the Leibstandarte and the people who lived in the Berlin-Lichterfelde district. The four kings of Prussia, Friedrich William I, Friedrich II, Friedrich Wilhelm III, and Wilhelm I, were each represented by a statue that was placed here at the entrance. Another indication that the Leibstandarte was attempting to establish exclusivity was the fact that they used terminology such as Bataillon, Company, and Zug, rather than the Nazi paramilitary Sturmbahn, Sturm, and Trupp. The idea that the Leibstandarte was a one-of-a-kind creature was the most important one that needed to be conveyed. The Leibstandarte remained the target of sniping by the Wehrmacht armed forces during the whole conflict. Hitler's Guard, like with other SSVT formations, was criticised by the Wehrmacht for putting an excessive amount of emphasis on racial issues and ceremonial accessories, despite the fact that they were neglecting to train for essential combat situations. Asphalt soldiers was a disparaging term that was used to refer to members of the Black Guard because of their penchant to march in parades. In the beginning, these criticisms held a great deal of validity. In point of fact, Himmler did take them extremely seriously, as demonstrated by the fact that in November 1938, he made the decision to accept retired Lieutenant General Paul Hauser from the Wehrmacht into the Swiss Social Security. In order to shape the SSVT, Hauser was granted the authority to do so. A newly refurbished recruiting office that immediately exceeded the Allgemeine SS, General SS, in terms of performance, was under Gottlieb Berger's supervision. A total of 17 recruiting stations, one in each military region, were established in addition to the SS recruiting office in Berlin, which was expanded and restaffed in order to begin the process of manpower recruitment. Berger's squad was able to recruit around 32,000 individuals in a span of only 8 months, the majority of whom were members of the Hitler Jugend collective. In the beginning, all of the members were typically between the ages of 19 and 22, and the majority of them were from the working class or the lower middle class demographic. The following is a good description of the findings that Gerald Reitlinger provides. There was a significant influence that Hauser's cadet schools had on the Waffen SS, which was responsible for developing the most successful military training program of World War II. This was accomplished by integrating components of the Guards depot at Caterham and the Spartan hoplites. The reality is that it was a combination of Hauser's practical experience serving in the Prussian army and Himmler's idealistic research on military laws that resulted in its creation. Hauser was hardly the only person to experience such a fad. Felix Steiner, a former junior army officer who served during World War I, was also inside the audience. As a consequence of this, he had witnessed big groups of men who had gone beyond their capabilities and become ammunition for the cannon. That level of savagery and the waste of human life was no longer acceptable. At this point in time, it is essential to have elites who have achieved a high degree of physical condition, according to Steiner, who emphasized this point. In the beginning, the Leibstandarte made fun of Steiner's preoccupation with sports and cross-country running, racial selection. Finally, there was training with military weapons. In addition to the prescribed readings, students were obliged to read In Blood und Boden by Walter Darrer and Myth of the 20th Century by Alfred Rosenberg. In the training exercises, which included live ammunition and artillery fire, the emphasis was placed on achieving the highest possible level of realism. According to Himmler, this was done so that every man became accustomed to his weapons and also to being 50 to 70 meters on either side of the explosion of his own artillery fire. As was to be expected, the Reichsführer SS did not appear to be very worried about the number of casualties, which led to criticism. On the other hand, it was acknowledged that every drop of blood in peacetime saved streams of blood in battle, despite the fact that it was a shame to lose each good German lad. Felix Steiner claimed in more basic words that a skilled Leibstandarte man would quickly break the opponent into pieces and then eradicate the dislocated Wehrmacht instructors were initially difficult, but there was a rapid improvement in those relationships. Albert Stenvedel, a trainee who finally joined 1st Company, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, recounted the following after completing his training at the Zossen military training facilities, which are located farther south of Berlin. The non-commissioned officers of the 8th Infantry Regiment, a division of the 100,000-man army from Silesia, provided us with our military training. We received exceptional instruction in drill, field and guard duties, which served as the foundation for our careers through the service. The individuals who acted as our instructors were long-time professional soldiers who remained completely politically impartial. Every single one of the recruits was a loyal member of the SS who had experienced the political fight firsthand and was thus familiar with the challenges of poverty, persecution and unemployment. All of this was something that our educators had never experienced before. Following only 1 week of working together, we had already established a strong sense of camaraderie, which was an outcome that could not have been more favourable. I went so far as to accept the offer extended to me by my instructor Unterfeldwebel Reigber to attend his wedding. Discipline, on the other hand, was never relaxed. When the Leibstandarte man went on leave, he was supposed to bring along a handkerchief that had been folded with a certain number of folds. If a paybook revealed an unsightly bulge in a uniform pocket, the person who wore the uniform run the risk of losing his earnings. However, this is only half of the story because the training schools laid the groundwork for a fierce and cruel fighting beast to be developed. Officers, non-commissioned officers and other ranks maintained a consistent sense of respect and camaraderie with one another. When it came to relatively insignificant matters, the concept that the future Waffen SS would be a band of brothers was prevalent. For instance, in order to prevent theft, it was mandatory for the troops who served in the Wehrmacht to lock their lockers. The soldiers under Himmler's command were not allowed to indulge in such behaviour or conduct. It is possible that the person who committed the theft will be prosecuted in exceptional rare cases. Concern was handled as if it were a private matter and no representatives from outside the organisation were consulted. The fact that Sepp Dietrich frequently ate meals with his men rather than with his colleagues' senior officers is descriptive of the manner in which he conducted himself. A democracy that was largely unknown existed within the Wehrmacht, when everything was taken into consideration. This stood in stark contrast to the rigorous class awareness that had been a characteristic of the Prussian military history for a very long time. It is important to note that this tradition continued to exist in a number of other armed SS branches. As a result of its formation during World War I, the Sturmabteilungen, also known as Stormtroopers, have a personality that was quite distinct from that of the rest of the German army. It was at this point that the social and professional barriers that had previously existed between officers and troops began to be broken down. Along the same lines as the later SS, the Sturmabteilungen possessed an almost arrogant and superior attitude. They had stated to the common people that they were a superior group. The fact that they were spared a significant amount of the boredom of trench fighting and had more time for relaxation and vacation also contributed to the fact that they enjoyed greater privileges and better nourishment. The legacy of the Sturmabteilungen proved to be a considerable and valuable advantage in the 1940s when it came to the Russian battlefields. The leadership of combat formations in full-scale assaults by officers of senior field rank became the norm. This was despite the fact that their fellow soldiers harboured hostility toward them. When young men who were interested in joining the Leibstandarte were first introduced to the training institutions, they were immediately exposed to the equality philosophy. Officers made the decision to join the armed SS based on their skills rather than their ancestry when it came to their career path. Before 1938, 40% of the SS officer cadets had only received elementary school education. James Lucas and Matthew Cooper write in their history of the Leibstandarte, which devotes a significant amount of space to unit character. This is in contrast to the situation in the armed forces, where 49% of officers came from military families. In the SSVT, the proportion was only 5%. In a similar vein, 90% of the SSVT commanders had been born and bred in the country, whilst in the Wehrmacht, less than 2% were of peasant ancestry. This, incidentally, reflects the fact that in various regions of Germany, a large percentage of recruits came from the countryside rather than the towns. In fact, up to 1/3 of the sons of farmers joined the ranks of the armed SS in the same areas that provided the NSDAP with the most support. Even if it was perfect, the Leibstandarte was not just distinguished by its impeccable training and discipline when it was in progress. All of the SS's endeavours were motivated by the ideology of the Nazi Party. A weekly indoctrination session was something that every single Leibstandarte guy was compelled to have to attend. As stated by the permanent education officer of the organisation, its principal objective is to exert influence over the Leibstandarte in order to enable it to perform the role of shock troopers for the regime in ideological studies at any given time. Simply acknowledging its relationship to the Führer and his commands is all that is required of it. It is necessary for us to put together the components of the Leibstandarte and transform them into a robust instrument that the Führer can make use of, and we have the time to do so. James Lucas and Matthew Cooper, who are as sensitive as ever to what could be interpreted as even the slightest infringement on his power, document the events that occurred in October 1933. These events served as one example among many of the confrontations that took place between Himmler and the Leibstandarte, which was essentially Adolf Hitler. At that point in time, the Leibstandarte was composed of a single signals Zug, platoon, 2 SS Sturmbanner battalions, and a staff. Each of the SS Sturmbanner battalions had 3 SS Stürmer, companies or units. Standard number 1, Leibmarkarte. It was the next year that the unit was given the new designation of Adolf Hitler, which was supposed to be the first of what was supposed to be a series of SS formations. Hitler, on the other hand, did not find particularly appealing the concept of featureless numbers for his elite. As we have seen, by the middle of 1934, designations like as Kompanie and Bataillon were assigned to the various components. Following that, expansion proceeded at a rapid pace until the beginning of the war. By May of 1935, the Leibstandarte, a motorized unit consisting of approximately 2,660 men, was responsible for approximately 25% of the overall strength of the SSVT. In July of the following year, the Trench Mortar Company, also known as Number 13, was renamed an infantry gun company, and at a later time, it became an armoured car platoon. By September of 1939, the number of soldiers in the Leibstandarte had increased to 3,700. By May of the following year, the Leibstandarte had a lightweight infantry column, an artillery battalion consisting of 3 batteries, and an additional infantry gun company. In front of hand-picked generals who had expressed misgivings about the capabilities of SS forces, large-scale exercises had already contributed to further enhance the prestige of the SSVT. These exercises had taken place at the Münsterlager Maneuver Center. In the full-scale combat drill that Himmler had prepared, Felix Steiner was in charge of supervising it. Richard Schulze-Kossens, who had served with Leibstandarte in 3 different battles, was there during the exercises and recalled them for a documentary that was broadcast on British television and under the title To the Death's Head True. The regiment was being attacked by a variety of weapons, including artillery, infantry, marksmen, submachine guns, hand grenades, and flamethrowers simultaneously. The German army had never done anything like that before, and the only people who could carry out such an operation were volunteers who had received extensive training. It appeared as though the head of the SS was enthusiastic about arming his soldiers. The objections raised by the Wehrmacht were disregarded, and it was decided that the SSVT would be structured as a division from that point forward, regardless of the opposition. On the other hand, when Hitler made the decision to attack Poland, the necessities of war suddenly unbalanced this situation further. Piecemeal arrangements were made for drafts from the Leibstandarte, Deutschland and Germania while they were under the jurisdiction of the Wehrmacht. It was not until the conclusion of the Balkan campaign that the unit was given the official name of SS Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. There was not a single member of the Waffen SS hierarchy who was particularly consistent, especially with regard to their dress. During times of conflict, it became impossible to do so, mostly because there was a shortage of materials coupled with an abundance of new items that were introduced throughout time. The pre-war uniform of the SSVT consisted of a single-breasted tunic with 4 metal buttons down the front, breast pockets that were pleated and buttoned, and hip pockets that sloped down and were buttoned down. Black leather belts with SS buckles, a black cap or steel helmet, and black slacks tucked into normal black marching boots, jack boots with the Wehrmacht pattern, were the items of clothing that they wore. It was reasonable to predict that the Leibstandarte uniform would feature substantial distinctions, given that it was worn by an elite organisation. According to Wolf Dieter, the eldest son of Sepp, who was interviewed by Charles Messenger, Dietrich's biographer, his father had designed it. Dietrich displayed a certain level of license as he progressed in rank and distinction, serving as commander of the Leibstandarte, 1st SS Panzer Corps and 6th SS Panzer Army. He took on these positions during his time in the military. It was a standard army general's duty headgear, with gold piping and a gold chin strap that he wore, rather than the silver piping that is typically associated with the SS. Hand embroidered in gold wire was the SS national emblem, and the cap was worn with the silver SS Death's Head emblem on the band. Both of these elements were worn together. Dietrich's field blouses and greatcoats featured gold embroidered letters and borders on a standard black backdrop. Additionally, the national symbol and the Adolf Hitler cuff title were sewn on the sleeves of these garments. Equally sophisticated was a greatcoat made of field grey doeskin, which featured a green satin lining and a gold hand-embroidered insignia over the chest. The runes of the SS that were attached to the studs of the collar did not have a unit number, and only members of the Leibstandarte were permitted to wear white decorations with their black uniform. It is possible to recognise Dietrich's soldiers by the SS collar patches that they wore. These patches were worn on the left side of the collar for grades up to and including SS Obersturmbannführer, and on both sides of the collar for higher ranked commanders. In point of fact, there were a number of different ways in which members of the Leibstandarte might be distinguished from other SS members based on the clothing that they wore. On a black tape wristband measuring 28mm, 1.1 inches in width and worn at the top of the left cuff, the name Adolf Hitler was printed in German. The monogram of LAH was embroidered on the shoulder straps. Service or uniform caps were characterized by a peak or visor made of black leather, a cap band made of black, and a peak that included a field grey cover. The matte silver SS interpretation of the national insignia, the eagle, was embroidered on the cap as well as the top left sleeve of the shirt. A SS Totenkopf, often known as Death's Head, was featured on the front of the cap band. It was a matte silver colour. Since 1935, the earth grey service dress used by the Leibstandarte, which was accompanied by a black service cap, black trousers, and a swastika brassard, has been replaced by a field grey uniform that is comparable to the one worn by the Wehrmacht, in point of fact, beginning in 1938. Up to the end of the war, the armed SS wore the Wehrmacht uniform, which was the final type of service uniform they wore. For the sake of preparing for the impending fight, the armoured troops were outfitted with black uniforms beginning in the year 1938. For very practical reasons, this was done since grime and grease were less noticeable when they were in black. In a manner analogous to that of the Wehrmacht, specialised clothing was developed to facilitate simple manoeuvring around armoured vehicles including tanks. Following the approval of the Waffen SS name in 1940, members of the Leibstandarte formations were provided with the normal army pattern field grey tunics. These tunics featured 5 buttons along the front and patch pockets on the chest and hips. When it was first developed in 1941, the same cut field grey was initially used for assault gun crews and later adapted for use by self-propelled anti-tank units. Throughout the course of the fight, it was unavoidable that a huge assortment of multifunctional camouflage schemes, each of which was matched to the appropriate season, were devised. As a result of its reversible nature, a single outer garment may be worn throughout the entire year. Over the course of the summer, it would be predominantly green, whilst the rest of the year it would have a warm brown colour. The insignia and uniform of the Waffen SS were developed with meaning in mind from the beginning. In the event that it was worn on the cap, the Death's Head emblem, which was prominent and was not exclusive to the Leibstandarte, symbolised loyalty to death. The right collar featured a double-slashed sig rune, sometimes known as a triumph rune, which inspired victory. This was in contrast to the popularly presumed initials SS, which stood for Schutzstaffel. The issue of shoulder boards for general ranking commanders was one example of how the Waffen SS and the Wehrmacht drew closer as the war neared, particularly with regard to the Leibstandarte. This was especially true at the beginning of the war. Stan Cook and R. James Bender, in their history of the Leibstandarte, which includes a comprehensive assessment of uniforms and insignia, observed that the use of shoulder boards was another indication of the tightly hierarchical structure of the Waffen SS. This was mentioned in their work. There was opposition to the idea of allowing the armed SS the authorization to wear shoulder boards comparable to those worn by the army. It was not until late November 1939 that the group leader Theodor Eicke of Totenkopf and the group leader Paul Hauser of Leibstandarte were granted permission to operate with them. An additional year later, dual rank usage was put into effect. The SS Brigadeführer and General Major of the Waffen SS, the SS Gruppenführer and General Lieutenant of the Waffen SS, and the SS Obergruppenführer and General of the Waffen SS were the titles that officers who held the appropriate general rank were permitted to add to their SS rank. The branch of duty of an officer was indicated by the use of colour, also known as Farbe, which was introduced to the armed SS on the verge of war. In addition to being employed for piping or underlay, Waffenfarbe was also utilised for shoulder straps and cords for all ranks up to and including SS Brigadierführer. Music played a crucial role in the Leibstandarte ceremony, which was held in Germany. In August of 1933, SS Hauptsturmführer Hermann Müller-John, who held the formal title of Leibstandarte Obermusikmeister, formed the music platoon. He was the first and only director of the music platoon. When he was in charge of the band, there were 36 members, but in just 3 years that number climbed to 64. During the years leading up to the war, the band was at the forefront of the entertainment scene at the Olympic Games held in Berlin in 1936. They performed concerts all over Germany. Due to the fact that Hitler was known to have a deep appreciation for Wagner's music, it should not have come as a surprise that the band offered a brass group for the Wagner Festival that was held in Bayreuth each year. On October 1st, 1938, the Leibstandarte, in conjunction with the Wehrmacht, travelled to the Sudeten region of Czechoslovakia in order to honour Hitler's visit to the region in order to inspect his recent gains. The Leibstandarte Music Corps played Hitler's beloved Badenweiler March as well as the regimental march when they received the Führer at the town of Horsin. At the same time, they also played the regimental march. In addition, the Music Corps frequently gave performances at a variety of party events and within the vicinity of the Reich Chancellery. The Schellenbaum, also known as the Jingling Johnny, was the focal point of the band, as it was for many other German military bands as well. This name refers to the proliferation of bells. It was the Schellenbaum that served as the band's standard, and in the case of the Leibstandarte, it was based on a variation that had been used in the past by the German Imperial Army. When the inevitable eagle was placed on top of a panel that had the words Adolf Hitler Standarte, as well as an eagle and a swastika, the panel was complete. An additional swastika bearing the name of the unit appeared on top of an 8-pointed silver star, which was placed above the regular half-moon of the emblem. The name Adolf Hitler Standarte is written in a modified Gothic script and is around 5 centimeters or 2 inches in height. On the other side of the trumpet, the SS runes were encircled by an aluminum fringe that was LCM, 0.39 inches in length. The top was attached to the trumpet. The Totenkopf and Adolf Hitler Standarte emblems were also present beside the ceremonial kettle drum that was featured in the event. There has already been a mention of the Congress of Victory meeting that was held to commemorate Hitler's rise to power. On September 1st, a single member of the SS team climbed onto the platform and displayed the Blutfahne, which is German for blood banner. Not only was this a prominent example of Nazi symbolism, but it also earned its name from the fact that it was supposedly smeared in the blood of Nazi victims who had been slaughtered during the failed beer hall putsch. In order to sanctify the new party colours, Hitler would touch them with one hand while clutching the cloth of the bullet-ridden Blutfahne in the other hand. This practice was carried out at each and every rally that took place in Nuremberg. The Leibstandarte placed a particular emphasis on the rally that took place in 1933. In this particular instance, it was displayed with its standard that was rectangular and double-sided. It included a field of crimson silk and a wool fringe that was black, white and red around the edges. There were 2 inscriptions, one that read Sturmabteilung and the other that read Nazos Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. Underneath the carrying pole of the standard, which had a wreath and swastika, there was a metal box that had the words Adolf Hitler etched on it. In the same year, the Leibstandarte was also presented with the 1st Battalion flags, which had a massive white circle that contained the swastika and magnificent red fields. Using Roman numerals, the number of the battalion was printed on a patch made of aluminum wire. Additionally, runes and a slant bar representing the Leibstandarte were also included. In the next year, Himmler presented the Leibstandarte with a new standard, as well as a variety of new flags. During the year 1940, the Leibstandarte witnessed a number of significant events, one of which was the unveiling of new regimental colours on September 7th in Metz, France. Additionally, 3 new infantry battalion colours in the new style were presented to the unit, as well as 3 guidance pennants for the artillery units. Mobile formations, notably artillery units, were the ones that were responsible for the invention of these guidons, which were intended to be flown from moving vehicles. The harmful impact of the Wehrmacht on the Waffen SS is once again visible in this instance. In light of this, the Leibstandarte decided to adopt the Wehrmacht style of pennants at the beginning of the war rather than the SS style that was more commonly used. Throughout the course of the war, the markings that were used to identify vehicles underwent a number of changes. On occasion, for reasons of security, these marks were deleted totally. One example of this occurred during the French campaign that took place in May of 1940. It was the emblem of the key that was the most well known. The word Dietrich, skeleton key, served as the inspiration for this phrase, which was first used in 1941. In this particular instance, symbolism was significant due to the fact that the Dietrich would open any door, including the one that would lead to triumph over the adversary. According to Cook and Bender, the Baltic Cross, also known as the Baltenkreuz, was initially proposed as the possibility for the first symbol for a tactical vehicle. Wilhelm Trabant, who was the commander of the 3rd Battalion, already wore this article of clothing on his uniform. He recommended using the Dietrich as a substitute for his own emblem, since he did not want it to be used as a symbol for another car. The usage of it was quickly embraced by the entire regiment, and it was also deployed on aircraft that were engaged in Leibstandarte surveillance missions. Despite the fact that the exigencies of war necessitated the suspension of most of the army-armed SS rivalries and disagreements, there was still one bone of contention that persisted: the statement that Waffen SS units, the designation SSVT was withdrawn in 1939, had improved their equipment in comparison to Wehrmacht formations. On the other hand, there are still compelling arguments both in favour of and against this stance among military historians. They make notice of the fact that the Wehrmacht did not give up any of its heavy armament to the SS until the year 1940 due to their constant refusal. A light artillery battalion of 105mm (4.13 inches) was established for the Leibstandarte in March, while 3 heavy artillery battalions measuring 150mm (5.91 inches) were organised, with 1 battalion assigned to each frontline division. However, the reason for the increased strength of Himmler's legions in terms of manpower was an order issued by the Führer on August 17, 1938. This edict mandated that during times of war, the armed SS would be strengthened by the Totenkopferbande, which were formations known as Death's Head formations, and contained guards from concentration camps. When 1940 rolled around, the 4 divisions that made up the SS were the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Reich, Totenkopf and Polizei. In addition, the corps of a 5th, known as Viking, was present. With a total of 3,700 personnel spread among 4 infantry battalions, a pioneer platoon, a motorcycle reconnaissance platoon, and supporting 75mm infantry gun and 37mm anti-tank companies, the Leibstandarte joined the battle. At the beginning of August, Hitler granted the Leibstandarte authorization to expand to the level of a brigade. Within a short period of time, it was renamed the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, and other units, including a reconnaissance unit, artillery regiment, pioneer battalion and signals company, were assembled. The following elements made up the bulk of the strength: I to 3 battalions, each with 3 rifles, 1 machine gun and 1 heavy company, the latter comprising 2 anti-tank gun platoons, 37mm 1.45 inches pack, and 1 mortar 80mm 3.15 inches, and pioneers, Biao heavy battalion, which consisted of 1 light infantry gun company, 75mm 2.96 inches, 1 heavy infantry gun company, 75mm 2.96 inches, 1 anti-tank gun company, 47mm 1.85 inches, self-propelled, 1 field gun company, 75mm 2.96 inches, self-propelled, and 1 anti-aircraft gun company, 37mm 1.45 inches, and V-Guard battalion, which had 4 companies based at Berlin-Lichterfelde. Furthermore, there was 1 artillery regiment, 1 reconnaissance detachment, 1 signals detachment, and 1 pioneer battalion deployed to the area. Following the conclusion of the campaign in the Balkans, the unit was given the official designation of SS Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. The fact that the Leibstandarte had reached a total strength of 6.78 officers and 20,166 other ranks by the time 1942 came to a close is a good indicator of the growing might that it possessed. By the time the formation was formally renamed 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte in October 1943, it had taken up to 150 trains to transfer the entire division from the east to Italy. This means that the armour was not included in the transportation process. By the time June of the next year rolled around, Leibstandarte had a total of 21,386 soldiers, 50 Mark IV tanks, 38 Mark V tanks, 29 Mark VI tanks, and 45 self-propelled guns. When it was at its peak, the Leibstandarte was one of the most powerful of the 6 or 7 German divisions that were active during World War II. It was also armed with the most cutting-edge and advanced weapons available at the time. As an illustration, according to James Lucas, the Leibstandarte was given 22 Tiger tanks, but Germany only had 74 of them at the time. This occurred in the latter half of 1943. During a time when adequate reinforcements were not anticipated, the Leibstandarte sustained significant damage as a result of its final rounds of combat. Because of the grave circumstances, Hitler's guard was reduced to just 57 officers, 229 non-commissioned officers, 1,296 men, and 16 tanks in the field on April 7, 1945. This was due to the fact that the situation was terrible. Throughout the course of World War II, the abilities of the Leibstandarte, in terms of both manpower and material, were to undergo considerable shifts. The reorganisations that took place were the reason for this, but the paucity of materials and the increasing number of deaths on the front line were also factors that contributed to this as the war progressed. As early as April 1939, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, released the directive for the uniform preparation for war in 1939/40. This directive detailed the uniform preparation for the war. At the early light of the morning on September 1st, Hitler eventually gave the order for his forces to invade, after a small delay. In one of the most significant parts of the OKW directive, it was stated that an unexpected assault would be carried out in order to eliminate the Polish army. The fact that this was happening was a sign that a different kind of war, not simply a conflict, was about to start. Clausewitz, a German military thinker, famously stated that the price of victory is always blood. This statement was made more than a century ago. Prior to his time, a significant number of his concepts were regarded as sacred doctrine. Philanthropists may readily feel that the art of war has a proper tendency to disarm and defeat the opponent without incurring a significant amount of carnage. This is a belief that may be rather widespread. The error must be eliminated as soon as possible. However, this was the year 1939, which was known as the Blitzkrieg, also known as the Lightning War. During this war, the strategies of speed and shock, together with the utilisation of all the resources that new technology had to offer, were utilised to accomplish victories rather than bloodstreams. The battlefield would be under the authority of the panzers, whose divisions would penetrate deeply into the defences of any adversary and divide the troops into discrete pockets. Screaming Stuka dive bombers would provide cover for bombing operations prior to that time. At the beginning of the Blitz invasion of Poland, which was sometimes referred to as Case Weiss, Case White, the Polish people were being attacked from 3 separate directions. During the time when General Fedor von Bock's Third Army was arriving from East Prussia, his Fourth Army began a large pincer drive in the northern part of the country. They attacked from Pomerania, which was located in the western part of the country. To obstruct the Polish corridor at its most extreme point was the goal of this operation. After that, an assault from the south moved in and attacked Warsaw. The 14th Army, which was commanded by General von Rundstedt, proceeded eastward toward Krakow, and Lwów, while the 8th and 10th Divisions moved eastward from Silesia toward Warsaw. Both divisions were advancing toward the south. The appearance was that of German muscle. A single infantry division, 4 light divisions, 6 panzer divisions, and 1 cavalry brigade were all planned to be stationed in the eastern region of the battlefield. After the mobilization, there were to be 16 additional divisions formed. However, there were protests from the more reserved members of the Wehrmacht, who mocked the tank troops and their assertions of technical superiority. These criticisms continued until the end of the war. Despite the fact that only 4 years had gone since the creation of the army, the panzer divisions in particular had acquired inadequate weaponry. Tanks were armed with machine guns rather than cannons. Nevertheless, this was matched by the unrivaled presence of a massive number of motorized and armored units that were capable of operating independently. The fact that their behavior in warfare was uncertain was the element that was unknown. The territorial expansion that occurred as a consequence of Germany's occupation of Czechoslovakia posed a threat to the section of Poland that is located on the southern flank. With the ability to anticipate challenges with skill, the Polish army had expanded from 30 to 39 infantry divisions. The Air Force had received reinforcements in the form of a bomber brigade and a chase brigade, in addition to the strengthening of all other formations. It was intended that the majority of the armed forces would be mobilized within the next 3 days. But it was too little, too late to make a difference. The majority of the 400 aircraft that were at the Polish front line were not operational. There were 225 modern tanks in the motorized force, and 80 of them were considered to be obsolete. The condition of its 534 reconnaissance carriages and 100 armoured cars of obsolete types was only marginally better than the previous state. There was only one of the 12 cavalry brigades that was armed with armour, and the artillery was not as effective as its German counterpart in terms of range or calibre. As early as the middle of June, orders had been dispatched to the Leibstandarte, which had returned to the Berlin region 2 months earlier. By the 1st of August in 1939, combat readiness was necessary for Sommerübung, which translates to summer exercise. In preparation for their first encounter with enemy blood, Sepp Dietrich's soldiers departed Lichterfelde, leaving behind a dispersed group of security, training and reserve troops. "SS guys, I expect you to perform more than your duty," Himmler said as they arrived at the gathering ground north of Breslau, close to Hunsfeld-Kunersdorf. This command reverberated in their ears as they arrived at the location. Dietrich divulged the following information while he was held captive in the aftermath of the war. "In the eyes of the Führer, we were his men. Our order has been delivered. We made progress forward. There were members of Leibstandarte who served in Army Group South. Von Rundstedt, in his capacity as group commander, was able to swiftly find work opportunities for Dietrich's soldiers under the leadership of the 17th Infantry Division. The men of Dietrich functioned as the liaison between the 8th and 10th Armies, solving the shortage in reconnaissance strength for the left wing of the 10th Army. This was accomplished under the direction of Generals Johannes Blaskowitz and Walter von Reichenau. The initial mission of the Leibstandarte, which was approaching from the Breslau region, was centred on a critical height behind the Prosna River. This height was located on the way from Breslau, and it was where a fortified frontier line was established. At a number of different levels, it came into contact with Polish soldiers and artillery. At the beginning of the first day of September, at 00:45, hostilities began, and the 8th Army was on high adrenaline. A few newly enlisted soldiers who had not yet been able to recite the Leibstandarte Oath of Loyalty were given the instruction to do so before they were allowed to engage in combat. These were young, gorgeous men from the SS who were virgins in fields that were going to become murderous in the near future. A letter had been sent to them in the past from one of their numbers, which stated, "I am writing this by extremely low light. There is a possibility that we will be at war with the Poles today unless they see reason. Tomorrow I shall be a fully fledged member of the military. After removing all of my personal thoughts from my mind, the only one that remains is about Germany." Over the course of 75 minutes, it made rapid progress, travelling approximately 5 to 8 kilometres, 3 to 4 miles, in distance. It was around 4:45 when the Leibstandarte arrived at the border between Germany and Poland. The first crossing took place at Gola, when the SS forces took control of the bridge that crossed the Prosna River. This occurred despite the fact that the Polish 10th Infantry Division's resistance was easily destroyed by their 37mm 1.49-inch weaponry. The village of Wieruszów, which was situated beyond Bolesławec, was the location where the Leibstandarte intended to establish a connection with the 17th Infantry Division, which was located on its left. When the clock struck 1000 hours, Bolesławec was already in the hands of the Germans, and columns of prisoners were already dressed in their field drab, with the Polish eagle glistening in the welt of their field hats. The Poles had suffered a great deal as a result of their efforts to halt the advance. The vast columns of Leibstandarte vehicles were attacked by dismounted Poles armed with machine guns. These Poles were well versed in their own territory in the countryside, which was primarily covered in impenetrable birch trees. Dietrich's forces, on the other hand, were ultimately successful in seizing all of their objectives, which included the Wielpolska and Wolwiska cavalry brigades, as well as the Polish infantry divisions, 10th, 17th and 25th. These individuals had participated in violent combat, which frequently involved hand-to-hand combat and counter-attacking. They entered the attack in long lines, not exactly shoulder to shoulder, but very close together, stated a member of the Leibstandarte's group. Throughout their lengthy whoop and battle cry, we were able to hear the officers yelling from their positions. 7 Germans were killed and 20 others were injured in the initial German casualties, which included the crew of an armed reconnaissance car as well as victims of a mine planted by the Polish military. Hitler was ecstatic after his swift victory in Poland, eagerly anticipating that his subsequent moves westward would be equally unchallenging. Buoyed by this confidence, the German war machine surged west with unyielding precision on the bright spring morning of May 10, 1940. This westward shift aligned with the momentous awarding of the Waffen SS title that same year, marking a critical turning point for the armed SS. As the elite unit Leibstandarte received increased recognition from Hitler himself, they trained rigorously, honing skills to operate as an independent, motorized force. Yet for the first time, these soldiers would engage in full divisional formations, commanded by their own officers, as they prepared to break the lines across Europe. Initially, orders were cryptic. When Hitler visited the Leibstandarte in their winter quarters the previous December, he offered only subtle hints about his plans. He spoke of battlefields where the blood of their forefathers had been shed but revealed little else. Finally, in February, their path became clearer. Leibstandarte was attached to the 18th Army under General Fedor von Bock, assigned to Army Group B. Their first mission was codenamed Danzig, a crucial operation that tasked them with breaking across the Dutch border, capturing vital road bridges and river crossings along the path to the Yssel River, all while minimizing structural damage. As dawn broke, an SS assault group, led by the formidable SS Hauptsturmführer Kurt Panzer Meyer, stationed itself at a bridge near the Dutch border town of De Poppe. Known for his aggressive tactics, Meyer was determined to swiftly overcome Dutch defences. The assault squad acted with surgical precision, cutting through the bridge's demolition fuses and discarding the road barriers to clear the path for the SS columns waiting behind. The assault was swift and brutal, catching the Dutch guards off guard, who were ill-equipped to repel the ferocity of the German advance. Despite their bravery, the Dutch forces faced overwhelming odds. Their outdated weapons and lack of anti-aircraft and anti-tank defences left them vulnerable to the heavily armed SS. Dutch soldiers, many of whom were young and inexperienced, fought valiantly to hold their positions. Small skirmishes erupted along the Dutch lines as pockets of resistance attempted to stall the SS advance, but the Leibstandarte's firepower and tactics overwhelmed these attempts. By midday, the Leibstandarte had advanced approximately 80 kilometers, 50 miles, along well-maintained routes aided by relentless Luftwaffe support. Flights of Junkers 52, loaded with paratroopers, dropped additional forces behind enemy lines to secure key positions. Upon reaching Bornebroek, the SS found the main bridge over the canal destroyed by Dutch defenders. Undeterred, the SS pioneers quickly improvised. Barn doors from nearby farms were chained together as makeshift rafts, and with little regard for their safety, SS troops pushed across the canal under a relentless hail of Dutch fire. The Dutch defenders, entrenched across the canal, unleashed bursts of gunfire and sporadic artillery in an attempt to halt the SS. However, despite these efforts, the Germans pressed on with grim determination. Finally, as night fell, the SS units managed to establish a foothold across the canal, overpowering the Dutch defenders in close combat. The shattered remains of Dutch resistance littered the battlefield, marking the beginning of a relentless drive across the Netherlands. Shortly after 1400 hours, the next target was set for Zwolle, the capital of Overijssel province. The Germans, especially the 227th Infantry Division, with whom the Leibstandarte had been deployed, found themselves facing unexpected resistance. Anticipating a paratrooper drop, the Dutch attempted to demolish the Yssel bridges to stall the German advance. Undeterred, the 3rd Battalion of the Leibstandarte forced a crossing to the south at Zutphen, despite the defenders successfully destroying both bridges. The village of Hoven, strategically located on a vital north-south railway line, became a battleground. After intense fighting, Leibstandarte troops took control, capturing over 200 Dutch defenders, who had held their ground bravely before finally yielding to the relentless German assault. As the fully motorized advance guard pushed towards Zwolle around midday, they were met by startled Dutch soldiers and fearful civilians. The swift capture of Zwolle showcased the ruthless efficiency of Blitzkrieg tactics, leaving the Dutch defences reeling in their wake. This engagement starkly demonstrated the West's severe underestimation of the speed and precision with which a lightning war could be waged. Meanwhile, SS Obersturmführer Hugo Krass earned a notable distinction for his courage in battle, receiving the Iron Cross First Class. He had previously earned the Iron Cross Second Class during the Polish campaign, and now his fearless participation in the Yssel crossing and deep incursion into enemy territory over 64 kilometers, 40 miles, brought him further honor. Kras, the son of a schoolteacher from the Ruhr, had shown a cold resolve, leading his men through with brutal effectiveness. The Leibstandarte's rapid advance, however, was brought to a standstill due to the destroyed bridges, ultimately leading to their withdrawal. New orders soon arrived, redirecting them to the critical operation in Rotterdam alongside the SS Verfügungsdivision and the 9th Panzer Division. As the campaign moved into Belgium, the German advance encountered the 7th French Army under General Henri Giraud, a formidable opponent. Giraud's forces, though lacking sufficient armour, anti-tank artillery and air support, presented a significant obstacle. German Fallschirmjäger had already seized the Maas Bridge at Moerdijk, a critical mile-long link on the road to Rotterdam, holding it firmly despite repeated counterattacks. However, without adequate support, Giraud's army was forced to retreat to Breda, unable to dislodge the entrenched German paratroopers or halt the advancing SS columns. The situation intensified with the release of Hitler's Directive No. 11, which acknowledged the Dutch army's resilience and ordered the swift elimination of any remaining opposition. Facing an ultimatum, Rotterdam's defenders were told to surrender or face a devastating aerial bombardment. Despite nearing capitulation, a catastrophic miscommunication resulted in the bombing of Rotterdam. German bombers unleashed destruction upon the city, leaving Rotterdam devastated. During post-war trials, both Hermann Göring and Albert Kesselring of the Luftwaffe denied knowledge of the surrender discussions, with the Germans later attributing the tragedy to an accident. With the Dutch campaign nearing an end, any rapid advance for the Leibstandarte seemed futile. Their new mission focused on providing relief to airborne units in and around Rotterdam before proceeding to The Hague. For Dietrich and his men, this slower pace was frustrating, especially as their momentum was repeatedly hindered. However, an unexpected and costly confrontation soon unfolded. While German and Dutch officials discussed terms of surrender at Dutch military headquarters, chaos erupted outside. Leibstandarte tanks and trucks roared through the streets, oblivious to the ceasefire negotiations. In the resulting confusion, Dutch forces, unaware of the surrender, opened fire on the Leibstandarte troops, sparking a fierce clash. Amid the turmoil, General Kurt Student of the 7th Air Division suffered critical injuries from a stray bullet as he moved to the headquarters windows to assess the situation. Dietrich and his men later insisted that they had not fired any shots, lacking the armoured support required for a tank-led advance, and pointed fingers at the 9th Panzer Division as responsible for the incident. This chaotic episode cast a shadow over the Leibstandarte's reputation, intensifying criticisms that labelled them as reckless and unrestrained. Some German officers condemned the aggressive tactics, arguing that charging through Rotterdam without coordination had endangered lives unnecessarily. At the time, General H.G. Winkelmann, the Dutch commander, had already ordered Dutch forces to lay down arms as Student sustained his injuries. Despite the controversy, the demands of the ongoing war soon pushed these questions aside. Nonetheless, the incident left a lasting impression, foreshadowing the scrutiny the Leibstandarte would face in the brutal campaigns to come. There was a brief intermission before the assault on France, during which the Leibstandarte and the 9th Panzer Division were ordered to conduct a triumphal tour of southern Holland. This display was intended to humiliate the defeated Dutch further and assert German dominance to the local population. Clad in their best uniforms, the troops moved through the towns with an air of victory, a clear statement of authority. With Holland subdued and the right flank secured, the German forces now turned their sights to the critical operations unfolding in northern France. The next phase of the Western campaign aimed to separate the British and French armies, isolating and crushing them one by one. As German forces advanced toward the English Channel, the evacuation perimeter around Dunkirk became a critical focal point. Here, British and French soldiers were packed along the coast, desperately awaiting evacuation. By May 24, 1940, the Leibstandarte, under the command of Panzer Group von Kleist, had gathered along the Aar Canal, positioned on both the eastern and southern edges of Dunkirk's defensive perimeter. However, in a surprising decision, Hitler, swayed by Göring's insistence, chose to delegate the destruction of the trapped Allied forces to the Luftwaffe, rather than a ground assault. That afternoon, he issued a direct order halting the ground attack, instructing the German forces to hold their positions at the canal and refrain from crossing. The command reached the front lines too late. The SS Verfügungsdivision had already begun operations, and Leibstandarte, directed by Guderian's corps, was preparing for a canal crossing at Watten. Guderian's recollections later highlighted the Leibstandarte's disregard for orders and their audacious defiance, which would ultimately shape the course of the battle. On May 25th, in the early morning hours, Guderian personally visited the Leibstandarte in Watten to verify their compliance with the halt order. To his surprise, he found them already traversing the Aar Canal. Despite the modest elevation of Mont Watten, which stood only 235 feet, 71 meters above the surrounding marshland, its height provided a strategic easily look right down the throat of any German forces stationed along the canal's edge. He argued that it was a tactical necessity to secure the high ground. Dietrich's defiance of the halt order was a calculated risk, rooted in his belief that the attack on Dunkirk would inevitably resume. His main aim, as he later claimed, was to prevent the enemy from taking advantage of what he viewed as a strategic error by Hitler or undue influence from the Wehrmacht generals. In a bold display of confidence, Dietrich reportedly told his men that if Guderian had tried to arrest him for this act of defiance, he would not have hesitated to shoot him on the spot. Seizing the opportunity, Guderian chose to capitalize on the Leibstandarte's momentum rather than reprimand Dietrich. Seeing the success of their advance, he ordered the 2nd Panzer Division to reinforce the SS units moving toward Wormhout and Burgas on the left flank. With combined infantry and armour support, the Leibstandarte and their reinforcements pressed forward, intensifying the pressure on the dwindling Allied defences. As German forces closed in, fierce skirmishes erupted in the town surrounding Dunkirk, with SS troops fighting house to house, clearing resistance with relentless efficiency. Dietrich's defiance, though controversial, exemplified the aggressive spirit of the Leibstandarte, which often led them to push beyond orders. Their assault toward Dunkirk became a defining moment, revealing the complex dynamics between obedience and battlefield pragmatism within the German command. This episode foreshadowed the Leibstandarte's continued role as a unit willing to defy convention and prioritize tactical advantage over strict adherence to command, a pattern that would play out repeatedly in the brutal campaigns yet to come. Due to this calculated defiance, the German forces successfully captured a bridgehead, allowing them to consolidate their position and push toward victory in the region. Wormhout, a town already scarred by bombing raids, was left to the mercy of the 2nd Battalion. Despite overwhelming odds, British defenders stubbornly held their ground, well aware that the capture of Wormhout would block a major route to the Channel coast, preventing a significant number of Allied forces from escaping. The fighting around Wormhout was brutal and unrelenting. In a nearby pocket, a fierce skirmish unfolded between a British major, an escaped prisoner who had taken refuge in an abandoned tank, and a detachment from the 1st Company of the Leibstandarte. One of the soldiers, Tishatsky, encountered the British major in a desperate clash. The major seized Tishatsky's rifle and launched a furious attack. Although taken by surprise, Tishatsky fought back with equal intensity, ultimately overpowering and killing the major. In a rare moment of respect for his adversary, Sepp Dietrich, upon hearing of the major's bravery, ordered a burial for the fallen soldier, complete with a salute from the men of the 1st Company. This act of honouring the enemy, though uncommon, highlighted Dietrich's complex character in battle, where respect was sometimes afforded even in the face of unyielding aggression. However, as the fighting wore on, Dietrich grew increasingly impatient with the slow progress in Wormhout. On May 28th, his 48th birthday, he decided to inspect the forward command stations to understand the reasons for the delay. Travelling in his powerful Mercedes, Dietrich swiftly crossed the open landscape toward the small village of Esquelbecq, just a few kilometres from Wormhout. Unbeknownst to him, British soldiers from the Gloucestershire Regiment had taken up positions nearby, and they seized the opportunity to launch a surprise attack. As Dietrich's vehicle approached, the British troops opened fire, catching him and Obersturmführer Max Wünsche in a deadly ambush. Bullets ripped through the Mercedes, setting it ablaze. Dietrich and Wünsche barely escaped, diving into a culvert beneath the road to shield themselves from the relentless gunfire. Although protected from the immediate gunfire, they faced another threat as a blazing trail of gasoline from the car's ruptured fuel tank began to flow dangerously close. Quickly realizing their peril, the two men covered themselves with the wet mud around them, successfully avoiding the flames. Eventually, a detachment from the 2nd Panzer Brigade arrived, rescuing the dishevelled and mud-covered Dietrich, who returned to Guderian's headquarters, visibly shaken and bearing the marks of the fierce encounter. His soldiers, witnessing their commander's uncharacteristic vulnerability, were both critical and concerned, as this close brush with death underscored the dangers they all faced in the grueling campaign. Meanwhile, Wilhelm Munke, now the senior company commander of the 2nd Battalion, led his troops in finally securing Wormhout after intense and bloody fighting. Throughout the day, several British prisoners were taken, adding to the already tense atmosphere between the opposing forces. Reflecting a moment of civility amid the violence, Dietrich later reportedly entertained some captured British officers, offering them armbands and unit insignias as mementos, showcasing a rare instance of chivalry toward Allied prisoners. However, this treatment was not universal. According to the Royal Warwickshire Regimental History, other captured soldiers did not receive such gestures and faced a grimmer fate in the brutal clashes that marked the fighting around Wormhout. The battle exemplified the merciless nature of the Western campaign, where brief instances of respect were overshadowed by unyielding aggression and harsh realities of war. This incident around Eskelbeck and Wormhout further cemented the reputation of the Leibstandarte as both ruthless and, at times, willing to show honour even to their adversaries, an uneasy duality that reflected the chaotic and often contradictory nature of the campaign. The brutal actions near Wormhout left an indelible mark on the campaign. Approximately 80 to 90 British soldiers, members of the 2nd Battalion, the 4th Cheshire Regiment and various artillerymen from a passing convoy met a horrifying fate at the hands of the Leibstandarte. The massacre took place in a barn on the outskirts of Wormhout. Around 50 troops from D Company, led by Captain Lynn Allen, and a few soldiers from A Company, were among those captured, as they were forced to march toward the barn. Captain Lynn Allen protested the mistreatment only to be taunted by the SS guards. The captives were crowded into the barn where the SS threw hand grenades among them, resulting in horrific casualties. The survivors were then led out in groups of 5 to be executed by gunfire, and when even this gruesome task was done, the SS fired indiscriminately into the barn to ensure no one remained alive. Yet, despite the overwhelming horror, a few managed to survive, thanks to the bravery and quick thinking of Sergeant J. Moore and CSM A. Jennings, who helped shield others. Among the survivors was Private Albert Evans of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, who had been standing next to Captain Lynn Allen during the grenade attack. Lynn Allen, displaying quick instincts, pulled Evans to safety, leading him through the barn door to a nearby cluster of trees with a shallow pond at its centre. There, the two men sought refuge, immersing themselves in chest-deep water. Their concealment was short-lived. A German soldier soon appeared on the bank above them, his handgun drawn. He fired twice at Captain Lynn Allen, who fell forward into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. The German then fired at Evans, striking him in the neck and arm. Believing his target neutralised, the soldier left Evans bleeding among the corpses scattered around the battlefield. Despite his injuries, Evans managed to reach a nearby house occupied by a German ambulance crew, where he received some treatment. He later became a prisoner of war, alongside other witnesses who surrendered, partly to prevent potential reprisals against local civilians. As the war progressed, the massacre at Wormhout remained largely obscured. Local labourers, working under German occupation, were later ordered to retrieve and rebury the bodies in 1941. Many of these graves bear inscriptions stating, "Buried nearby," as the SS had removed identification discs, and accurate identification of the remains proved difficult. When hostilities ceased, investigators from the War Crimes Tribunal sought justice for the 80 to 90 British prisoners killed. Unfortunately, many of the German witnesses who could testify had died on the Eastern Front, and none of the British survivors could positively identify specific perpetrators. It is very complicated why this had happened. Historians have stated it was commanded by Wilhelm Munke, or the LSSAH soldiers did as their own accord as they thought this is what was needed of them, as the British soldiers almost killing their commander, a truly tragic event. Leslie Aitken, chaplain to the Dunkirk Veterans Association, conducted extensive research on the massacre. In 1973, he obtained photographs of 2 SS officers alleged to have been present at Wormhout. One of the survivors identified Sepp Dietrich in the images. Dietrich, however, maintained his ignorance, often repeating that he was unaware of any gunfire, claiming, "I spent the day in a ditch," referencing his ambush ordeal near Eskelbeck. Wilhelm Munke, another high-ranking SS officer, was suspected of giving the order to dispose of the prisoners. Mohnke's refusal to speak about the incident highlighted the SS's strict adherence to their oath of loyalty, an unbreakable bond that encouraged silence even after the war. Mohnke himself was held captive by the Russians until the mid-1950s, avoiding prosecution in the West. With Dunkirk behind them, the Leibstandarte shifted focus to the broader French campaign. Their relentless motorized advance inflicted heavy casualties, with nearly 3,400 losses among SS ranks. As casualties mounted, reinforcements were urgently dispatched from Reich training centres to replenish the ranks. The ongoing resistance from the French, though increasingly strained, continued to pose a challenge. Led by the 9th Panzer Division, the Leibstandarte advanced swiftly across the Seine, opening the way for Panzer Group von Kleist with minimal resistance. The 2nd Battalion's progress was marked by substantial spoils. At Clermont-Ferrand, they captured 242 aircraft and 8 tanks from the French forces, a testament to their sweeping success. For his role in pushing into the French army's rear, particularly aiding in the encirclement of the French Alps army, Sepp Dietrich was rewarded with command over the 16th Corps, which would support the Italian advance along the French Riviera. However, not all encounters were straightforward. In Saint-Étienne, southwest of Lyon, the Leibstandarte took a brief 2-day respite from the front lines. Here, they encountered an unusual spectacle: vintage World War I tanks deployed by the French. Though antiquated, these tanks showed surprising resilience, holding up the German advance for a short period. The sight highlighted the desperation and determination of the French defenders, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Despite occasional setbacks, the Leibstandarte's relentless march continued. Under von Kleist's orders, they pressed toward the River Allier near Moulins, northwest of Lyon. Here, the Leibstandarte showcased their combat effectiveness. At one point, their advance was stalled by a well-defended barricade, leaving them at a temporary disadvantage due to insufficient troops. In response, SS Obersturmführer Knittel organized a swift assault, leading a motorcycle detachment in a daring head-on attack. This brazen maneuver shattered the French defences, clearing the barricade and allowing the advance to continue. Amid this relentless pace, the Leibstandarte encountered significant traffic congestion near Vichy, where French forces blocked key routes. The French accepted armistice terms on June 22nd, and just 3 days later, von Bock informed Dietrich that hostilities had officially ended. The campaign had been costly for the Leibstandarte, with 390 wounded and 111 dead. Dietrich's personal bravery and leadership earned him the prestigious Knight's Cross, a commendation that added to his earlier accolades from the Polish campaign, where he had previously received the Iron Cross 1st and 2nd class. The citation noted Dietrich's independent resolve and decisive role in securing bridgeheads, especially at Watten, where his infamous act of disobedience had enabled German forces to consolidate their hold on northern France. Ironically, the very disobedience that had caused controversy became a point of honour in his commendation. Rather than participating in the Grand Victory Parade in Paris, Hitler opted for a more discreet Cook's tour, visiting historical sites, including Napoleon's grave. As a result, the Leibstandarte was excluded from the celebrations, and instead set out on a 2-day march to Metz, where they would undergo extensive refitting and retraining. Their brief involvement in preparations for an amphibious invasion of England soon became irrelevant, as the operation was cancelled. On July 28th, orders arrived that the Leibstandarte would be expanded to brigade strength, incorporating 3 new rifle battalions, along with artillery, reconnaissance, and heavy weapons regiments. In August, Himmler conducted an inspection, announcing a new standard for the regiment and praising its elite status. However, Himmler's attempts to expand the SS further were met with resistance from the army, which viewed the SS with suspicion and was unwilling to release more men. Himmler voiced his frustrations, remarking, "We have been hearing the Wehrmacht's complaint since 1933. He argued that SS men, despite limited formal training, showed a remarkable aptitude for leadership, believing that every SS soldier had the potential to become an officer. However, the army's disdain remained rooted in the SS's relatively lower training standards and the perception that they hadn't faced comparable combat losses, a view that Himmler saw as deeply flawed. Hitler attempted to placate the army's concerns, emphasizing the Waffen SS's contributions to the German armoured corps, which, in his view, had secured a prominent place in military history. Sepp Dietrich, meanwhile, stoked the competitive tension. Declaring his pride in leading the Leibstandarte, the only regiment personally named by Hitler, he capitalized on the rivalry between the SS and the Wehrmacht, pushing his men to prove themselves on the front lines. This drive intensified the unit's reputation as fiercely loyal, aggressive, and relentlessly ambitious, a force that would stop at nothing to achieve its objectives. And with that, we wrap up today's video. I'm incredibly grateful to have you here until the end. Your support truly means the world to me. A huge shout out to my amazing patrons. If you'd like to support the channel or get access to some exclusive content, the links to my Patreon and Instagram are down below. I hope you learned something new, and as always, I'll see you in the next adventure. Take care and goodbye for now.